On a quiet summer night in Birmingham, gunshots shattered the silence. A man lay bleeding outside his mother's home. A father, a mentor, a figure of respect in his community. His name was Anthony Sargeant, but to those who knew him, he was the king of Lee Bank. But this was no random act of violence. This was a targeted, calculated execution. A drive-by shooting carried out with ruthless precision. And within hours, the men responsible were laughing and celebrating, as if they had just committed the perfect crime. What led to this cold-blooded killing? Who were the men behind it? And how did detectives bring them to justice after years of relentless investigation? This is the story of the murder of Anthony Sargeant, one that left a family shattered and a community demanding answers. Before we dive in, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more in-depth true crime stories, just like this one. Anthony Sargeant wasn't just another name in Birmingham. He was a man who commanded respect, not through fear, but through the way he lived. Known as the King of Lee Bank, he was a father of 8, a mentor, and a man determined to uplift his community. Growing up in an area where violence and crime were all too common, Anthony understood the struggles faced by young people. But instead of walking away, he chose to make a difference. He founded Rickman Rovers, a local football team that became more than just a game. It was a way to keep kids off the streets, to teach them discipline, teamwork, and responsibility. He wasn't just their coach, he was their role model. For many, Anthony was a guiding force, someone who saw potential where others saw trouble. His influence stretched beyond the football pitch. Parents trusted him, the community respected him, and young boys who might have otherwise turned to crime found hope in his leadership. But in a world where past connections and old rivalries never truly fade, no amount of goodwill could protect him. Beneath the surface, tensions were brewing. Tensions that would lead to a brutal, calculated act of violence. And on one fateful night in August 2018, everything Anthony had built would be overshadowed by the sound of gunfire. August 25th, 2018. It was a warm summer night in Birmingham, and Anthony Sargeant stood outside his mother's home on Rickman Drive, Lee Bank. It was a familiar place, a safe space where he had spent many evenings with family and friends. But on this night, he was unaware that within moments, his life would be cut short. A stolen BMW crept through the neighborhood, its occupants hidden in the darkness. Inside, armed men sat in silence, their hands gripping weapons as they watched their target. This was not a random act of violence, it was a planned execution. The vehicle slowed as it approached Anthony. In the blink of an eye, the silence was shattered. Gunfire erupted, the sharp crack of bullets slicing through the night. Neighbors flinched at the sudden violence, their peaceful evening turned into chaos. Anthony was hit, the force of the impact driving him to the ground. The car didn't stop. Its tires screeched as it sped off into the distance, disappearing before anyone could react. People rushed to Anthony's side, their panicked voices filling the street. His family screamed for help as they tried to keep him conscious. The bullet had torn through his back, causing catastrophic damage. Paramedics arrived within minutes, doing everything they could to stabilize him before rushing him to the hospital. Moments later, police arrived at the scene. Blue lights flashed against the dark streets as officers quickly secured the area. Witnesses were questioned, their shaken voices recounting the terrifying moments of the shooting. Detectives marked bullet casings on the ground, taking photographs and scanning the area for any signs of evidence. CCTV cameras from nearby buildings were checked, and officers began piecing together the events leading up to the attack. But on the other hand, for 6 painful days, Anthony fought for his life. His family held on to hope, praying for a miracle. But the injuries were too severe. On August 31st, 2018, Anthony Sargeant passed away, leaving behind a devastated family and a grieving community. Shockwaves spread through Birmingham. A father, a mentor, a man who had worked to guide young people away from crime, had become a victim of the very violence he wanted to stop. But while his killers had escaped into the night, they had left behind clues that detectives would follow with determination. The search for justice had begun since the incident. With Anthony Sargeant's death confirmed, the shooting was no longer just an attack. It was now converted into a murder investigation. The pressure was on for West Midlands police to find those responsible before they could strike again. But in a case like this, solving the crime wouldn't be easy. The killers had planned their escape well, and in neighborhoods where fear and silence often go hand in hand, getting witnesses to speak up was a challenge. Still, detectives had one advantage in the form of evidence. The crime scene had already provided vital clues. Bullet casings were recovered, forensics teams examined the area, and CCTV footage from nearby buildings became a key focus. Officers traced the movements of the stolen BMW used in the drive-by, hoping it would lead them to those culprits behind the attack. As police dug deeper, mobile phone records began to paint a clearer picture. Calls and messages linked several individuals to the area at the time of the shooting. Surveillance footage captured glimpses of masked figures moving with purpose. Slowly but surely, the pieces of the puzzle were coming together. But despite these early leads, there was no immediate arrest. The police knew they had to build a case that would stand up in court. Witnesses were hesitant to come forward, fearing retaliation. The suspects were linked to organized crime, and they had experience in covering their tracks. A rushed arrest could risk the case falling apart, so detectives worked carefully, ensuring they gathered every piece of evidence needed to build a strong case for an undeniable conviction. But the real breakthrough came months later when officers carried out a raid in Derbyshire. Inside a property, they discovered something chilling. The very gun used to kill Anthony Sargeant. The weapon was a direct link to the killers. And now, detectives had the proof they needed to begin making arrests. The hunt for justice was no longer just a search for names. It was a countdown to capture. With the murder weapon recovered and a web of evidence linking the suspects to the crime, the police were ready to strike. But this wasn't just about arresting one person. This was a carefully coordinated operation to bring down an entire group. So they checked every corner of their carefully constructed strategy to avoid any mistakes. Surveillance was intensified, movements were tracked, and tactical units were put on standby. There would be no room for error. The focus was on 4 key individuals: Michael Goodwin, Connor Goodwin, Keenan Anderson, and Leon Riley. These men had spent months thinking they had committed the perfect crime, but detectives had been tracking their every move. Mobile phone data placed them near the scene, CCTV footage linked them to the stolen getaway car, and forensic evidence connected them to the weapon used in the shooting. The police had everything they needed. One by one, they were taken into custody. The Goodwin brothers were arrested first, their attempts to deny involvement quickly unraveling as detectives laid out the overwhelming evidence. Keenan Anderson and Leon Riley followed, both caught in the net of a case too strong to escape. During questioning, all 4 men refused to take responsibility, each trying to distance themselves from the crime. But the truth was unavoidable. The police had spent months gathering every possible piece of evidence, leaving no gaps for the suspects to escape through. Witness statements placed them at key locations, forensic analysis connected them to the deadly weapon, and mobile phone records traced their movements before and after the murder. The pieces fit together too perfectly for any of them to deny their roles. With the case now airtight, prosecutors moved forward with the charges. The men were officially accused of Anthony Sargeant's murder, along with additional firearm offenses linked to the illegal possession and use of deadly weapons. It was a crime that had sent shockwaves through Birmingham. A father taken in cold blood, a community left in fear. But the days of these men walking free were over. Justice was no longer just a demand. It was about to be delivered. As the case went to trial, the courtroom became the battleground where justice for Anthony Sargeant would be decided. The prosecution laid out the evidence in meticulous detail. CCTV footage showing the stolen getaway car, mobile phone records tracking the suspect's movements, and the recovered murder weapon, which forensics proved had fired the fatal bullet. Witnesses took the stand, some reluctantly, knowing the dangers of speaking out. Others remained silent, but the weight of the evidence was undeniable. The prosecution argued that this was not a random shooting. It was a premeditated attack carried out with precision and intent. Throughout the trial, the defendants continued to deny their involvement. They attempted to shift blame, claiming they had no part in the killing. But the jury saw through the lies. After carefully reviewing the evidence, they delivered their verdict: guilty. In March 2023, Michael Goodwin, Connor Goodwin, Keenan Anderson, and Leon Riley were sentenced to life in prison. The Goodwin brothers were ordered to serve a minimum of 32 years before parole could even be considered. Anderson and Riley received minimum terms of 28 years. The sentences reflected the brutality of their crime and the pain they had inflicted on Anthony Sargeant's family. As the verdict was read, emotions ran high in the courtroom. For Anthony's loved ones, no sentence could bring him back, but knowing his killers would never walk free gave them a sense of closure. His children had lost a father, his community had lost a mentor, and Birmingham had lost a man who had dedicated himself to guiding young people away from violence. The impact of his murder stretched far beyond the courtroom, but justice had finally been served. In the days following the trial, Anthony's family spoke out about the devastating loss they had endured. His mother, who had watched her son fight for his life in the hospital, described the heartbreak of knowing he would never come home. His children, left without their father's love and guidance, faced a future forever changed. The sentence had brought justice, but it could never undo the damage. Meanwhile, the case sent shockwaves through Birmingham. Many saw Anthony's murder as a tragic example of how gun violence continued to plague communities, even for those trying to make a positive difference. His killing was a painful reminder that no one was truly safe from the consequences of street crime. West Midlands Police used the case as a warning, increasing efforts to crack down on gun-related violence in the region. Officers urged communities to break the cycle of silence, encouraging people to come forward with information to prevent further tragedies. Anthony Sargeant's murder was a devastating loss, not just for his family, but for an entire community. He worked to inspire change, yet became a victim of the very violence he tried to prevent. His killers thought they could escape justice, but the truth caught up with them. This case is more than a conviction. It's a wake-up call. How many more lives must be lost before the cycle of violence ends? Anthony's story should push us to act, to protect future generations from the same fate. His legacy lives on in those he mentored. Let his name be a reminder, not of tragedy, but of the change he fought for. If you found this video informative, comment down your thoughts. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to UK crime documentaries, and hit the bell notifications to all to stay updated on our latest crime stories. Until next time, take care.